Congratulations, Mr. Rivers. You now own the fifth largest airline in North America. The words echoed through the mahogany-paneled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower in downtown Chicago. Damon Rivers, 42, looked down at the signature page of the acquisition agreement, his Montblanc pen still warm in his hand. The numbers were staggering $2.8 billion. Phoenix Airways was now his. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline stretched endlessly under an overcast Thursday afternoon sky. At 3:47 p.m., Damon had just completed the largest aviation acquisition in the past decade. The lawyers around the mahogany table were shaking hands, popping champagne, and making congratulatory phone calls. But Damon sat quietly staring at the Phoenix Airways logo on the cover of the contract. He thought about his father, Marcus Rivers Sr., who had worked the assembly line at Ford Motor Company for 37 years. His dad had never set foot in first class, never owned a business, never had lawyers celebrating his success. But he had taught Damon something more valuable than money. Dignity couldn't be bought, but it could be stolen. And when it was stolen, you had the choice to either accept it or fight back. Damon had built Apex Ventures from nothing. After graduating from Northwestern with an engineering degree, he'd spent 8 years at Ford, watching less qualified white colleagues get promoted over him. The final straw came in 2009 when he presented a revolutionary electric vehicle design to the board. The project was shelved. 6 months later, a white engineer presented the same design and received a $2 million development budget and a promotion. That night, Damon quit. He used his savings, his 401k, and a loan against his Detroit home to start Apex Ventures. 15 years later, he owned manufacturing plants, tech companies, real estate developments, and now an airline. But the memory of being overlooked, dismissed, and disrespected still burned in his chest like a pilot light that never went out. "Sir." His assistant, Marcus Thompson, appeared at his shoulder. "Your car is ready. The Gulfstream is fueled and waiting at Midway." Damon looked up from the contract. "Cancel the jet, Marcus." "Sir, I'm flying commercial tonight." "Phoenix Airways Flight 447 to LAX. First class." Marcus frowned. He'd been Damon's assistant for 5 years and knew his boss well enough to recognize when a decision was final, even if it seemed strange. "Should I book the seat?" "Already done. Bought it this morning under my name." Damon stood straightening his navy blue polo shirt. He'd deliberately dressed down today, wearing dark jeans and leather sneakers instead of his usual tailored suits. "I want to see my investment from the inside. See how Phoenix Airways treats a paying customer who doesn't look like their typical demographic." Marcus nodded slowly. "The press release goes out tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Nobody knows about the acquisition yet." "Perfect." Damon picked up his leather briefcase. "That means tonight I'm just another passenger. Let's see how they treat someone like me when they think nobody's watching." The law firm's managing partner, Harold Goldstein, approached with a crystal champagne flute. "Damon, you should be celebrating. This is the acquisition of the year." Damon accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Harold, what do you know about Phoenix Airways' customer service record? Excellent reputation. Premium carrier. They cater to business travelers, celebrities, high net worth individuals. Have they ever been sued for discrimination?" Harold paused his champagne halfway to his lips. "Not that I'm aware of." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about my investment." Damon set down his untouched champagne. "Marcus, let's go. I have a flight to catch." As they walked toward the elevator, Marcus pulled out his tablet. "Should I alert Phoenix Airways management that you'll be flying tonight? Arrange for VIP treatment." "Absolutely not." The elevator doors opened. "If I get VIP treatment, I'll never know what their regular service looks like. I'll never know how they treat people who look like me when they think it doesn't matter." The elevator descended toward the parking garage. Through the glass walls, Damon could see the lights of Chicago beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. Somewhere out there, Phoenix Airways Flight 447 was preparing for departure. The crew had no idea that their new owner would be sitting in Seat 1A tonight. But they were about to find out that in the service industry it always matters how you treat people. Because you never know who's watching, and you definitely never know who's signing your paycheck. The automatic doors of Terminal 3 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport slid open with a mechanical whisper, releasing a blast of recycled air that smelled like coffee fast food, and the particular stress that comes with missed connections and delayed flights. It was 5:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening, and the terminal buzzed with the controlled chaos of business travelers racing to catch red-eye flights to the West Coast. Damon Rivers stepped into the crowd, pulling a small black carry-on bag behind him. His appearance was deliberately understated dark jeans that fit perfectly, but bore no designer labels, a navy polo shirt that could have come from any department store, and leather sneakers that whispered money to anyone who knew what to look for but didn't scream wealth to the casual observer. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and a shaved head, Damon moved through the terminal with the confident stride of a man who belonged wherever he chose to be. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his amateur boxing days in Detroit. His watch was expensive, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars, but he wore it face down, hiding the distinctive design. Thunder rumbled outside the massive windows that lined the concourse. The departures board flashed yellow warnings. Delayed, delayed, delayed. Flight after flight pushed back by the severe thunderstorms rolling across the Midwest. But Flight 447 to Los Angeles still showed on time. Damon approached Gate B12, where a growing crowd of travelers clustered around the departure area. The gate agent, a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail, was fielding complaints from passengers whose connecting flights had been canceled. Her name tag read, Rebecca Walsh, and the smile she wore looked like it had been painted on with industrial-strength lacquer. "Next," Rebecca called out, not bothering to make eye contact with Damon as he approached the counter. "Good evening," Damon said, holding out his phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. "Flight 447 to LAX." Rebecca glanced at the screen and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her eyes flicked up to Damon's face, then back to the phone, then up again. "First class. That's correct." She scanned the QR code with her handheld device. The machine beeped green, but Rebecca frowned at the display as if the technology had somehow made an error. "This shows Seat 1A, Premium First Class. I'm aware. This is a full fare ticket, not an upgrade." "Correct." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Purchased this morning. Is there a problem?" Damon's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it that made Rebecca look up sharply. "No, sir." She handed the phone back to him, but her customer service smile had vanished entirely. "Boarding begins in 30 minutes. Zone 1. As Damon walked away from the counter, Rebecca immediately picked up her desk phone and dialed a number. Brenda. "It's Rebecca at Gate 12. We might have a situation with the first-class boarding tonight. Guy in Seat 1. A doesn't look like our typical clientele. Might want to keep an eye on things." 20 feet away, Sophia Martinez was setting up her phone on a small tripod, preparing to go live on Instagram. At 28, the travel influencer had built a following of 2.1 million followers by documenting her experiences flying on different airlines around the world. She'd been live streaming from O'Hare for the past hour, talking about storm delays and travel tips. But something about the interaction she'd just witnessed at the gate counter caught her attention. The way the gate agent had looked at the tall black man. The way her demeanor had changed. The phone call she'd made immediately afterward. Sophia had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about the civil rights era, about buses and lunch counters, and the casual cruelty of people who believed they had the right to decide where others belonged. She recognized the look in Rebecca's eyes. She'd seen it before. She adjusted her camera angle to include the gate area and quietly continued her live stream. Her audience was growing 500 viewers, then 800, then 1,000, 200. People were always eager to watch travel content, especially when storms were making everyone's journey more complicated. But Sophia had a feeling this flight was going to be about much more than weather delays. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin boarding Phoenix Airways Flight 447 with nonstop service to Los Angeles. We'd like to welcome our first class and platinum elite passengers aboard at this time. Rebecca Walsh's voice crackled through the gate area speakers as she lifted the red velvet rope that separated the boarding lanes. The announcement triggered the usual shuffling of passengers, business travelers checking their phones one last time, families gathering their carry-on bags, and the distinctive migration of premium passengers toward the front of the line. Damon Rivers joined the small group of first-class passengers walking down the jet bridge. Ahead of him, an elderly white gentleman with a silver-tipped walking cane chatted with a woman in a Chanel blazer about their mutual connections in the film industry. Behind him, a young man in his 20s checked his Rolex loudly, making sure everyone within earshot knew it was Swiss and expensive. The jet bridge smelled like rain and jet fuel. Through the metal accordion walls, Damon could hear the ground crew loading luggage into the cargo hold, their shouts muffled by the thunder that continued to roll across the Chicago skyline. Stepping aboard the aircraft, Damon entered a world designed to separate the haves from the have-nots. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and brushed metal with seats that converted to full beds and individual entertainment centers. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, and the lighting was warm and golden, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and comfort. Standing at the entrance to the first-class cabin was Victoria Ashworth, the head flight attendant. At 45, she was impeccably groomed in a way that suggested significant time and money spent on maintenance. Her blonde hair was styled in a sophisticated chignon that hadn't moved despite the humidity of the Chicago evening. Her Phoenix Airways uniform had been tailored to fit her figure perfectly, with the skirt a calculated inch shorter than regulation, and the blazer cut to emphasize her narrow waist. Victoria's smile was brilliant, practiced, and completely genuine when she was looking at the right sort of passenger. "Mr. Kensington," she exclaimed as the elderly gentleman with the cane approached, "how wonderful to see you again. We have your usual Macallan 25 chilled and waiting, and I made sure the chef prepared your favorite, the Dover sole, with that lemon butter sauce you requested last month." "Excellent." "Victoria?" "Excellent," Mr. Richardson replied, beaming. "You always take such good care of me. It's my pleasure. You know we consider you family here at Phoenix Airways." Behind Victoria, a younger flight attendant named Jake Morrison arranged amenity kits and pre-flight beverages on a silver tray. Jake was 38, with the kind of eager energy that suggested he'd been trying to impress Victoria since the day he started working for the airline. He smiled at every interaction, laughed a little too loudly at Victoria's comments, and positioned himself as her loyal lieutenant in the choreographed dance of first-class service. The woman in the Chanel blazer received similar treatment: warm greeting, personalized service, immediate recognition. Victoria knew her name, her usual drink, and asked about her daughter's graduation from Dartmouth. Then Damon approached. Victoria's smile didn't disappear completely, but it definitely dimmed. She looked at him with the expression of someone trying to place a face she couldn't quite remember. Her eyes swept from his casual clothes to his carry-on bag to his face, and something in her posture shifted. "Boarding pass," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Good evening to you, too," Damon replied, showing his phone screen. "Seat 1A. Victoria squinted at the digital pass as if she were reading Sanskrit. 1A. She repeated slowly. "I'm going to need to verify this." She pulled out her tablet and began tapping through screens. Jake appeared at her shoulder, equally focused on the device, as if Damon's seat assignment were a complex mathematical equation requiring dual verification. "Premium first class." Victoria murmured, still staring at her tablet. "Full fare." "Is there a problem?" Damon asked. "Oh, no, sir," Victoria said quickly, but her tone suggested the opposite. It's just that 1A is typically reserved for our most valued customers, our Platinum Elite members, our VIP guests. I see. And what makes you think I'm not a valued customer? Victoria's smile became even more forced. I didn't say that. I just want to make sure there hasn't been a mistake in the reservation. Behind them, other passengers were starting to board. Sophia Martinez had upgraded herself to first class using points specifically so she could document what she suspected was about to become a very interesting story. She settled into seat 3B and immediately began live streaming again, her phone discreetly positioned to capture the conversation at the front of the cabin. Everything seems to be in order, Victoria finally admitted, handing Damon's phone back to him. Please take your seat. Quickly, we have other passengers boarding. As Damon moved toward seat 1, Victoria exchanged a look with Jake that spoke volumes. Jake immediately busied himself with rearranging amenity kits that didn't need rearranging, while Victoria picked up the cabin phone and pressed a button that connected her directly to the cockpit. Captain Bennett, we may have a situation developing in first class. Passenger in 1A doesn't quite fit our usual profile. Might want to stay aware in case we need to make any adjustments before departure. The conversation was quiet, but Sophia's phone was close enough to capture every word. Her live stream audience had grown to 3,000 viewers, and the comments were already starting to reflect what everyone was seeing: a black man being treated differently than the white passengers who had boarded before him. Sophia adjusted her camera angle and typed a quick message to her viewers. Something's happening here, guys. Stay tuned. She had no idea she was about to document one of the most explosive confrontations in aviation history. Excuse me. You're in my seat. The voice cut through the soft jazz and murmured conversations of the first-class cabin like a knife through silk. Damon Rivers looked up from his phone to see a young man standing in the aisle, his face flushed with indignation and entitlement. Tyler Blackstone was 26 years old and had never been told no in his entire life. His trust fund had a higher balance than most people's annual salaries, and he wore his wealth like armor, a Hermes belt, Gucci loafers, and a blazer that cost more than many people's rent. His dark hair was styled with expensive gel, and his cologne was strong enough to make nearby passengers wince. I'm sorry, Damon said calmly. You're in my seat. 1A. I always sit in 1A. Tyler spoke louder now, ensuring that the entire first-class cabin could hear him. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. Damon glanced at the digital display on his armrest, which clearly showed seat 1A, then back at Tyler. I don't think so. Check your boarding pass. Tyler huffed dramatically and turned toward the galley. Victoria, Victoria, get over here! Victoria Ashworth appeared instantly, her heels clicking against the aircraft floor like typewriter keys. Mr. Blackstone, what seems to be the problem? This man is in my seat, Tyler declared, pointing at Damon as if he were identifying a criminal in a lineup. I specifically requested 1A. My father owns Blackstone Hotels. I always get 1A. Victoria's expression immediately shifted into customer service overdrive, but only for Tyler. She turned to Damon with a look that could have frozen champagne. Sir? She said, her voice dropping the warm tone she'd used with Tyler. I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. I've shown it 3 times, Damon replied, his voice still calm but with a steel edge that made Victoria take half a step back. I'm in seat 1A. This gentleman is mistaken. I am not mistaken. Tyler's voice rose to near shouting level. Several passengers turned to watch, and Sophia Martinez adjusted her phone camera to capture the entire confrontation. Her live stream audience had exploded to 8,000 viewers, with comments flooding the screen faster than she could read them. Victoria pulled out her tablet again and made a show of scrolling through screens. Mr. Blackstone, it appears that there was a glitch in the reservation. Someone was able to purchase seat 1A, but you're our Platinum Elite member. You have priority. A glitch. Damon repeated, his voice dangerously low. Yes, a glitch, Victoria confirmed. These things happen with the online booking. But don't worry, we can find you a seat in Economy Plus. It has extra legroom. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the aircraft's air conditioning. Even the soft jazz seemed to pause. Let me make sure I understand, Damon said slowly. You think my legitimate ticket is the result of a glitch, but his verbal request for the same seat is valid. Mr. Blackstone is a valued customer, Victoria replied. His family has platinum status with us. And what am I? Victoria's pause lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. You're a customer. But Mr. Blackstone has priority. Based on what his skin color? The words hit the cabin like an electric shock. Tyler's face turned red. Don't you dare play the race card. This is about status, not color. Then show me your boarding pass, Damon said. Prove you have a ticket for this seat. Tyler's flush deepened. I don't need to show you anything. Victoria, handle this. Victoria took a deep breath, smoothing her uniform. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to gather your belongings and move to the seat we're offering you. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to call security. Security? Damon's eyebrow rose. For sitting in the seat I paid for. For causing a disruption. Victoria said, her voice growing louder. For refusing to follow crew instructions. For making our other passengers uncomfortable. As if on cue, Tyler nodded vigorously. I don't feel safe flying with someone who's being aggressive. Aggressive, Damon repeated. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved from my seat. I haven't made a single threatening gesture. How exactly am I being aggressive? Victoria pulled out the cabin phone. Captain Bennett, we have an uncooperative passenger in first class. He's refusing to follow crew instructions and becoming increasingly hostile. We may need to have him removed before departure. Wait a minute, came a voice from seat 4. B, a Hispanic businessman in his 50s, stood up. I've been watching this whole thing, and that man hasn't been aggressive at all. He's been calmer than I would be. Victoria whirled around. Sir, please take your seat. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I watch someone being treated unfairly because of how they look, the man replied firmly. Sophia Martinez seized the moment. I'm live streaming this entire thing, she announced loudly, holding up her phone. 12,000 people are watching right now. They can see exactly who's being aggressive. Victoria's face went pale. Ma'am, you need to turn off that camera immediately. No, I don't, Sophia replied. This is a public space and this is newsworthy. In the comments of her live stream, viewers were rapidly identifying the situation and sharing the video. Hashtag Flight447 was already starting to trend on social media. Victoria looked around the cabin and realized she was losing control of the situation. Everyone needs to calm down and take their seats. We're going to handle this professionally. You mean you're going to have security drag out the paying customer to make room for your VIP friend? Sophia asked, still filming. Tyler looked around the cabin and noticed for the first time that multiple phones were now recording. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but with less confidence than before. Damon remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Victoria, I want to ask you one question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Do what make this your hill to die on. Victoria stared at him, something in his tone making her hesitate. But she'd gone too far to back down now. Sir, you need to move. That's final. Damon nodded slowly and reached for his phone. In that case, I need to make a call. As Damon Rivers pulled out his phone, the tension in the first-class cabin reached a breaking point. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know who these people really were. Victoria Ashworth had spent 20 years perfecting the art of exclusive service. She started as a flight attendant straight out of college back when the airlines still hired based on looks as much as qualifications. She was beautiful, charming, and quickly learned that first-class passengers tipped better when they felt special. Over 2 decades, she'd served oil executives, tech billionaires, celebrities, and old money aristocrats. She'd memorized their drink preferences, their allergies, their favorite seats. But Victoria's service came with conditions. In her mind, first class wasn't just about the ticket price, it was about belonging to the right world. She was the gatekeeper of an exclusive club, and she decided who was worthy of membership. Her divorce from tech millionaire Richard Ashworth 3 years ago had left her financially dependent on her flight attendant salary and the generous tips from grateful passengers. She needed those VIP customers to see her as indispensable. Tyler Blackstone represented everything Victoria believed first class should be. His family had built Blackstone Hotels from a single property in Aspen to a global luxury chain worth $3.2 billion. Tyler had grown up in Manhattan penthouses and Hamptons estates, attending private schools where his last name was donation-worthy. He'd never had a job, never been denied anything he wanted, and genuinely believed that his comfort was more important than other people's rights. At 26, he saw the world as his personal concierge service. What Tyler didn't know was that his family's hotel chain had service contracts with Phoenix Airways. When their VIP guests flew, they often stayed at Blackstone properties. Victoria knew this, which made Tyler's happiness a business priority for her. Sophia Martinez had a different perspective on luxury and service. Her grandmother, Isabella Martinez, had been a civil rights activist in the 1960s. Isabella had been on the buses in Montgomery, at the lunch counters in Nashville, and in the freedom rides through Mississippi. She'd faced down police dogs and water cannons, all for the simple right to be treated with dignity. Growing up listening to those stories had shaped Sophia's worldview. When she saw the way Victoria looked at Damon, the suspicion, the assumption that he didn't belong, she recognized something her grandmother had described countless times: the casual cruelty of people who believed they had the right to decide where others could sit. Sophia's travel blog had started as a hobby, but it had grown into a platform for social justice. She'd exposed discrimination at hotels, restaurants, and airlines around the world. Her 1 million followers trusted her to document truth, not just pretty destination photos. But the most important backstory in the cabin belonged to Damon Rivers himself. In 1998, 24-year-old Damon had driven from Detroit to Chicago for a job interview with a major consulting firm. He'd scraped together money for a nice hotel room, wanting to make a good impression. When he arrived at the Regent Hotel, exhausted from the drive and nervous about the next day's interview, the desk clerk looked him up and down and claimed the reservation was invalid. "You don't look like someone who'd stay here," the clerk had said. "Are you sure you didn't book at the Days Inn down the street?" Damon had shown his confirmation email, his credit card, and his ID. Nothing mattered. The clerk insisted there was no room available despite the vacancy sign glowing in the window. Damon slept in his car that night in the hotel parking lot, using the lobby bathroom to clean up before his interview. He got the job anyway. But lying in that back seat staring at the hotel's lit windows while rain drummed on his roof, he made himself a promise someday he would own places that had rejected him. And when that day came, he would make sure no one else ever felt the humiliation he felt that night. 26 years later, he'd built a business empire worth $12 billion. He owned manufacturing plants, tech companies, real estate developments. And now, as of 3:47 p.m. that afternoon, he owned Phoenix Airways. Victoria Ashworth had no idea that the man she was trying to remove from seat 1A was about to become the most powerful person in her professional life. Tyler Blackstone didn't know that his family's hotel contracts were about to be reviewed by someone who valued dignity over dollars. and Sophia Martinez was about to document the moment when power and prejudice collided at 30,000 feet, changing all of their lives forever. Airport security, this is Phoenix Airways Flight 447 requesting immediate assistance. Victoria Ashworth's voice cut through the cabin like a siren. She held the cabin phone with white knuckles, her professional composure finally cracking under the pressure of what she'd started. We have an uncooperative passenger in first class who's refusing to follow crew instructions and making threats towards staff. The lie hung in the air like smoke. Damon Rivers hadn't made a single threat, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even stood up from seat 1A. But Victoria had painted herself into a corner, and she was determined to power through rather than admit she'd made a mistake. Threats. Sophia Martinez called out from seat 3B, her phone still recording everything. What threats? I've been filming this entire time, and he hasn't threatened anyone. Ma'am, I need you to stop recording and put that device away, Victoria snapped. No, Sophia replied calmly. This is a public space. I'm not violating any laws, and 14,000 people are watching this live. They deserve to see what's really happening here. Tyler Blackstone, sensing that the momentum was shifting away from him, decided to double down. He threatened me, Tyler declared loudly. He said he was going to make me pay for this. I don't feel safe. When Damon asked, his voice deadly calm. When exactly did I threaten you? Tyler's face flushed. It was implied. The way you looked at me, the tone of your voice. So you feel threatened by my tone of voice and the way I look at you? Yes. And what exactly is threatening about how I look? The question created a moment of silence that seemed to stretch for minutes. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, because the honest answer that a calm, well-dressed black man in first class somehow seemed threatening to him was not something he could say out loud. From seat 2, a Mr. Richardson finally spoke up. Young man, he said to Tyler, I've been sitting here watching this entire situation unfold. That gentleman hasn't done anything threatening. If anything, he's shown remarkable restraint. Victoria whirled around. Mr. Richardson, please don't involve yourself in this. I'm already involved. I'm a witness to what's happening here, and what's happening is wrong. In seat 4B, the Hispanic businessman stood up again. This is absolutely wrong, he said, his voice growing stronger. I've flown Phoenix Airways for 15 years. I've spent probably $50,000 on tickets. But if this is how you treat paying customers, I'll never fly with you again. More passengers began to speak up. A young white couple in seats 3A and 3C started recording with their phones. An elderly black woman in seat 5A began shaking her head and muttering about the same old nonsense. The cabin was no longer quiet and controlled, it was buzzing with outrage and disbelief. Sophia addressed her live stream audience. For those just joining, we're witnessing a black passenger being threatened with removal from his paid first-class seat. The crew claims he's being threatening and uncooperative, but as you can see, he's sitting calmly while other passengers defend him. Flight 447 from Chicago to Los Angeles. The hashtag Flight 447 was now trending nationally. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. Social media was exploding with outrage. But inside the cabin, Victoria was doubling down. Everyone needs to return to their seats and stop interfering, Victoria announced. This is a crew matter, and federal law requires you to comply with crew instructions. What crew instruction? Mr. Richardson asked. The instruction to watch quietly while you discriminate against a paying customer. I am not discriminating against anyone. Then why are you trying to remove him from a seat he legitimately purchased? Sophia asked, still filming, still. Victoria's composure was cracking. 20 years of customer service training was warring with the panic of a situation spiraling out of control. Because Mr. Blackstone has platinum status. Show us his boarding pass. the Hispanic businessman demanded. "If he has a legitimate claim to that seat, prove it." All eyes turned to Tyler, who suddenly looked much less confident. "I don't have to prove anything to you people?" "You people," Sophia repeated, her voice sharp. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" Tyler realized his mistake immediately. I mean passengers who aren't involved in this." "No," Sophia said firmly. "You meant exactly what everyone thinks you meant." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay while we resolve a passenger service issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Captain Sarah Bennett was a 20-year aviation veteran who prided herself on running a tight ship. She'd received Victoria's initial call about an uncooperative passenger and had authorized the security call based on her head flight attendant's assessment. Now, listening to the chaos in the cabin through the intercom, she was beginning to question that decision. Through the small window between the cockpit and first class, she could see that the threatening passenger was sitting calmly in his seat while other passengers argued on his behalf. This wasn't adding up to the picture Victoria had painted. Meanwhile, Damon finally spoke again. "Victoria, I asked you earlier if you were sure you wanted to do this. I'm asking again. Are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take?" Something in his voice, not threatening but quietly confident, made Victoria hesitate. But she'd called security, filed a report, and made a scene in front of a cabin full of passengers. There was no graceful way to back down now. "Yes," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You're being disruptive and need to be removed." Damon nodded slowly and dialed a number on his phone. "Marcus. It's Damon. Yes, I'm on flight 447. No, we haven't taken off yet. Actually, we have a problem." Victoria tried to interrupt. "Sir, you cannot make phone calls during—" "Marcus." Damon continued, ignoring her completely. "I need you to implement Protocol 7 immediately." "Protocol 7?" Victoria repeated, confused. "Yes," Damon said into the phone, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent cabin. "Full board termination, effective immediately, and Marcus call legal. We're going to need documentation of everything that's happened here tonight." The words board termination sent a chill through the first-class cabin. Even Tyler looked uncertain now. "What's Protocol 7? Sophia whispered to her phone screen, asking her 18,000 live viewers. Victoria was about to find out that some passengers were much more dangerous than others, not because they were violent or threatening, but because they had the power to end careers with a single phone call. And airport security was about to arrive to find a situation far more complicated than they'd been told to expect. Captain Sarah Bennett stared at the security request form on her tablet, her 20 years of aviation experience warring with the chaos she could hear through the cabin door. She'd authorized the security call based on Victoria's report of an increasingly aggressive passenger-threatening crew and other travelers. But the voices filtering through the intercom told a very different story. She could hear multiple passengers defending the alleged problem passenger. She could hear someone live-streaming the incident to thousands of viewers, and she could hear her head flight attendant's voice getting higher and more strained with each exchange. Bennett picked up the cabin phone. "Victoria, I need a clear status report. What exactly is happening out there, Captain? We have a passenger in 1A who's refusing to move to accommodate our Platinum Elite customer. He's been making veiled threats and creating a disturbance." Through the thin cabin door, Bennett could clearly hear a man's voice, calm, measured, speaking into a phone about something called Protocol 7 and board termination. The voice didn't sound threatening. It sounded like business. "Victoria, has this passenger physically threatened anyone? Has he used profanity? Has he made any gestures that could be considered aggressive?" There was a pause. "Well, no, not exactly. But his tone is very intimidating. His tone, and he's refusing direct crew instructions. What instructions specifically to move to a different seat so our VIP passenger can have one? A. Bennett closed her eyes. She'd been a captain long enough to recognize the sound of a discrimination lawsuit in the making. Victoria does this. Passenger have a legitimate boarding pass for 1A. Yes, but what? But Mr. Blackstone has platinum status. Does Mr. Blackstone have a boarding pass for 1A? The pause stretched long enough that Bennett knew the answer before Victoria spoke. He requested the seat, and we usually accommodate Victoria. Bennett's voice cut through the explanation like a blade. You called security to remove a passenger from a seat he legitimately purchased, so you could give it to someone who doesn't have a ticket for it. It's more complicated than that, Captain. Mr. Blackstone's family has a business relationship with Phoenix Airways. His satisfaction is important to our corporate partnerships. Bennett was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what Victoria was telling her. Victoria, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have approximately 30 seconds before airport security arrives at our aircraft. When they get here, they're going to ask for documentation of threats, aggressive behavior, or violations of federal aviation regulations. Do you have any of that? I have multiple witnesses that he's been disruptive. Do you have witnesses to threats or violence? No. Do you have video evidence of aggressive behavior? No, but Victoria, cancel the security request immediately. Captain, I can't do that. Too many people are watching. If I back down now, it will look like the crew doesn't have authority. Bennett looked out the cockpit window and saw 2 security officers walking rapidly across the tarmac toward their aircraft. Victoria, backing down now will save your career. Not backing down is going to end it. But Victoria was beyond reasoning. She'd spent 20 years building her reputation as the head flight attendant who could handle any situation. VIP passengers specifically requested flights she was working because they knew she'd take care of them. Her entire professional identity was wrapped up in being the guardian of first-class exclusivity. Captain, I know how to handle difficult passengers. Trust me on this. Bennett made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. Instead of overriding her head flight attendant and taking direct control of the situation, she chose crew solidarity over common sense. All right, Victoria, but document everything, and be very careful about what you say to security. Make sure your facts are absolutely accurate. What Captain Bennett didn't know was that Damon Rivers had just finished his phone call with Marcus Thompson, and that Marcus was already implementing protocols that would fundamentally change Phoenix Airways' corporate structure. She didn't know that the passenger Victoria was trying to remove was the man who had signed the acquisition papers just 3 hours earlier. Most importantly, she didn't know that her decision to support Victoria's discrimination complaint would make her complicit in the most expensive customer service failure in aviation history. As the security officers reached the aircraft door, Bennett made one final announcement over the cabin intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're working to resolve a passenger issue and should be underway shortly. The passenger issue was about to resolve itself in ways that no one on Flight 447 could have anticipated. And when it was over, Captain Sarah Bennett would understand why experienced pilots always investigate thoroughly before making decisions that can't be undone. Because in aviation, as in life, there's a critical difference between supporting your crew and enabling their mistakes. Bennett was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical hiss, and 2 Chicago Police Department officers stepped into the first-class cabin. Officer Mike Hendricks, a 15-year veteran, and Officer Janet Rosa, newer to the force, but experienced in de-escalation, both immediately sensed that something was off about this call. They'd been told to expect an aggressive passenger who was threatening crew and refusing to follow instructions. What they found instead was a well-dressed black man sitting calmly in his seat, surrounded by passengers who were clearly agitated but not at him. "Evening, folks," Officer Hendricks said, his voice carefully neutral. "We received a report of a disruptive passenger. Can someone tell me what's going on?" Victoria rushed forward, her professional composure barely holding together. Officers, thank you for coming. We have a passenger in seat 1A who's refusing to follow crew instructions and has been making threats. Officer Rosa looked around the cabin, noting the multiple phones recording the scene. What kind of threats? He threatened me? Tyler interjected, stepping forward. Said I would pay for this. I don't feel safe flying with him. Damon finally stood up, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any action that could be misinterpreted. Officers, I'd like to clarify something. At no point have I threatened anyone. I have a legitimate boarding pass for this seat which I purchased this morning for $12,000. I have not raised my voice, used profanity, or made any threatening gestures. Officer Hendricks studied Damon's calm demeanor, then looked at Tyler's red face and agitated body language. Sir, can you show me this threat was made? It was implied, Tyler said, his voice rising. The way he looked at me, you felt threatened by how he looked at you? Sophia. Martinez spoke up from seat 3B, still live streaming. Officer, I've been recording this entire incident. 22,000 people are watching live right now. At no point has this man made any threats. What you're witnessing is discrimination. Officer Rosa approached Sophia. Ma'am, can you replay any threatening language or behavior from this passenger? There isn't any to replay. That's the point. Mr. Richardson stood up in seat 2A. Officers, I've been flying for 40 years. I've never seen anything like this. This gentleman has shown remarkable patience while being harassed for sitting in a seat he paid for. The Hispanic businessman from seat 4B added his voice. I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you this is textbook discrimination. This passenger has done nothing wrong. Officer Hendricks was getting a clearer picture of the situation. Let me see your boarding pass, sir, he said to Damon. Damon handed over his phone showing the digital pass. Hendricks studied it carefully. Seat 1. A purchase this morning confirmed reservation. He looked at Tyler. And your boarding pass. Tyler's face went pale. I don't have a boarding pass for this specific seat, but my family has business relationships with this airline. I always get 1A. So you don't have a ticket for this seat. Not technically, but... Sir Officer Rosa interrupted. You can't demand someone else's seat without having a valid ticket. Victoria sensed the situation slipping away from her. Officers, you don't understand. Mr. Blackstone is VIP. His satisfaction is crucial to our business relationships. Ma'am, Officer Hendricks said firmly, we're not here to manage your business relationships. We're here because you reported a threatening passenger. Can you show me evidence of any threats? The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the aircraft's systems. Victoria realized she was trapped by her own exaggerations. Tyler, sensing that the officers weren't going to side with him, decided to escalate matters physically. This is ridiculous, he shouted, lunging toward Damon. You don't belong in first class. Tyler grabbed Damon's arm, trying to pull him away from seat 1A. The physical contact was brief, maybe 3 seconds, but it was captured by multiple cameras and witnessed by both police officers. Hey, Officer Rosa immediately stepped between them. Sir, step back now. Damon didn't react aggressively to Tyler's grab. He simply stood his ground and said quietly, Officers, you now have a witness to actual assault. I'd like to press charges. Tyler's face went white. I barely touched him. You put your hands on another passenger without consent, Officer Hendricks said. That's assault, regardless of how hard you grabbed him. Sophia addressed her live stream audience. Did everyone see that? The young man who's been demanding this seat just physically grabbed the legitimate passenger. This is being recorded by multiple people and witnessed by police officers. The comments on Sophia's stream were exploding. Viewers were sharing the video across all platforms. Hashtag Flight447 was now trending globally, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Tyler realized the magnitude of his mistake. Wait, this is all being recorded. By about 25,000 people. Yes, Sophia confirmed. Officer Rosa was taking notes. Sir, I'm placing you under arrest for assault. Arrest? Tyler's voice cracked. For touching someone's arm. For putting your hands on another passenger during a dispute. That's assault under Illinois law. As Officer Rosa began reading Tyler his rights, Victoria made one last, desperate attempt to maintain control. Officers, you're disrupting our flight schedule. We need to resolve this and get airborne. Officer Hendricks looked at her with barely concealed disgust. Ma'am, you called us here based on false information. You reported threats that didn't exist, and now we have an actual assault that happened because your crew failed to de-escalate a situation they created. Damon sat back down in seat 1. His expression unreadable. Officers, I'd like to add something to your report. Yes, sir, I'm the new owner of Phoenix Airways. The acquisition was finalized at 3:47 this afternoon, and I believe this incident requires a thorough review of crew training and passenger service policies. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria's face went ashen. Tyler stopped struggling against his handcuffs. Even the police officers looked surprised. Officer Hendricks cleared his throat. Sir, could you repeat that I own this airline? And I just watched my employees discriminate against me in front of thousands of witnesses. The revelation hit the cabin like a physical force. This wasn't just a customer service failure anymore. It was a corporate disaster of epic proportions, all captured live and broadcast to a global audience. And it was just the beginning. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 had transformed from a sanctuary of luxury into something resembling a courtroom with Damon Rivers as the surprise witness who had just demolished the prosecution's case. The silence following his revelation stretched for what felt like minutes, broken only by the soft chime of notifications from phones around the cabin as news of the confession spread across social media. Victoria Ashworth stood frozen, her perfectly styled composure cracking like ice under pressure. 20 years of customer service experience had not prepared her for this moment. She'd discriminated against passengers before subtle slights, cold service, convenient forgetfulness about amenities. But she'd never done it to someone who could end her career with a phone call. Tyler Blackstone, still in handcuffs, looked like he was about to vomit. His trust fund and family connections had always been his armor against consequences. But you can't buy your way out of assaulting the owner of an airline in front of police officers and 25,000 live-stream viewers. Officer Hendricks was trying to process the legal complexity of what he'd just witnessed. Sir, you're saying you own Phoenix Airways as of 3:47 p.m. today, yes? The acquisition was finalized by my company, Apex Ventures. The announcement goes public tomorrow morning. Damon reached into his briefcase and pulled out a leather folder. Here are the signed acquisition documents if you'd like to verify. Officer Rosa whistled softly as she examined the papers. This is legitimate. Apex Ventures purchased Phoenix Airways for $2.8 billion. Sophia Martinez was narrating the developments to her live stream audience, which had now grown to over 40,000 viewers. For those just joining, the passenger who was being discriminated against and threatened with removal has just revealed that he owns the airline. This is the biggest plot twist in aviation history. The comments on her stream were moving too fast to read. No way. This is better than a movie. That flight attendant is done. I can't believe this is happening live. From his seat in 2A, Mr. Richardson shook his head in amazement. In 60 years of flying, I have never seen anything like this. The Hispanic businessman in 4B was grinning broadly. Victoria, I believe the phrase you're looking for is, "Would you like something to drink, sir?" Victoria's legs felt weak. Her mind was racing through every interaction she'd had with Damon since he'd boarded. Every slight, every assumption, every moment of deliberate disrespect was now a potential termination offense. Mr. Rivers, she stammered. I had no idea. No, Damon cut her off, his voice calm but firm. You had no idea I owned the airline. But you knew exactly what you were doing when you assumed I didn't belong in first class. Captain Sarah Bennett's voice crackled over the intercom. Mr. Rivers, this is Captain Bennett. Could I speak with you privately in the cockpit? No need for privacy, Captain. Everyone here has witnessed what happened. They deserve to hear what happens next. Damon stood and addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. You've all been forced to witness something that should never happen on any airline, especially not on one that I now own. He looked directly at Victoria. Ms. Ashworth, your employment with Phoenix Airways is terminated, effective immediately. Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. Please, Mr. Rivers. I have 20 years with this company. I have a mortgage, car payments. I made a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake, Damon replied. Mistakes are accidental. What you did was deliberate discrimination. You decided that because of how I look, I couldn't possibly belong in first class. You called security to have me removed from a seat I legitimately purchased. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Tyler tried to speak from his handcuffs. Mr. Rivers, my family does a lot of business with airlines. Maybe we can work something out. Your family's hotels will no longer have service agreements with Phoenix Airways, Damon said without looking at him. And you're banned from flying on any aircraft I own. Permanently. Officer Hendricks was taking detailed notes. Sir, will Phoenix Airways be pressing charges against this passenger for the assault? Absolutely. And I want a full report of this incident filed with the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and the Chicago Police Department's Civil Rights Division. Sophia addressed her audience. Guys, we're witnessing corporate justice in real time. This isn't just about firing a discriminatory employee. This is about changing how airlines treat passengers. Jake Morrison, the junior flight attendant who had supported Victoria throughout the incident, stepped forward nervously. Mr. Rivers, I just want to say, you stood by and watched discrimination happen, Damon said. You assisted in it. You're fired too. The gate agent, Rebecca Walsh, who had made the initial phone call warning Victoria about Damon, was watching the live stream from the gate area. She quietly submitted her resignation before security could escort her out. Damon pulled out his phone again. Marcus, we need a replacement crew for Flight 447. And I want our legal team to prepare a comprehensive review of all customer service incidents involving passengers of color over the past year. A replacement crew? Victoria asked weakly. Did you think we were going to continue with a crew that discriminates against passengers? This flight will be operated by employees who understand that respect isn't dependent on skin color. As if summoned by the conversation, 3 new Phoenix Airways employees appeared at the aircraft door, a new head flight attendant, a junior attendant, and a replacement gate agent. All 3 were people of color, and all 3 looked significantly more professional than the crew they were replacing. The new head flight attendant, a dignified black woman in her 40s, addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Susan Williams, and I'll be your head flight attendant for the remainder of this flight. We sincerely apologize for the delay and the inexcusable behavior you've witnessed. This is not who Phoenix Airways is, and it's certainly not who we're going to be going forward. As the old crew was escorted off the aircraft, Damon sat back down in seat 1A, the seat he'd paid for, the seat he'd been threatened for occupying, the seat that had sparked a revolution in airline customer service. But the real transformation was just beginning. As the disgraced crew was escorted off Flight 447, Sophia Martinez's live stream had evolved from travel content into breaking news coverage. her audience had grown to over 60,000 viewers, with major news networks monitoring the feed and social media platforms struggling to keep up with the viral spread of hashtag Flight 447. For those just joining, Sophia narrated into her phone camera, "We're witnessing unprecedented corporate accountability in real time. The owner of Phoenix Airways just fired his own crew for discriminating against him while he was traveling incognito. But this story is bigger than one flight." In the comments, viewers were sharing their own experiences with airline discrimination. Stories of passengers being questioned about first-class tickets, asked to prove they belonged in premium cabins, or subjected to extra security screenings based on their appearance. The live stream had become a forum for experiences that usually remained private. The new flight crew was efficiently resetting the cabin atmosphere. Susan Williams, the replacement head flight attendant, moved through first class with the kind of professional warmth that Victoria Ashworth had only shown to white passengers. She personally apologized to each passenger for the delay and ensured everyone was comfortable. "Mr. Rivers," Susan said as she reached seat 1. "Hey, is there anything I can get you? A beverage, perhaps, or something to eat? I know this has been a stressful evening." "Just water, thank you," Damon replied. And Susan, "Yes, sir. I want you to treat me exactly the same way you'd treat any other passenger. No special service, because I own the company. That's the point of all this." Meanwhile, in the Apex Ventures headquarters in downtown Chicago, Marcus Thompson was coordinating the most complex crisis management operation of his career. The acquisition of Phoenix Airways had been kept secret, but Damon's revelation on the live stream had forced them to accelerate their timeline dramatically. Marcus was fielding calls from reporters, federal regulators, civil rights organizations, and Phoenix Airways board of directors, most of whom had just learned about the acquisition from social media. His phone rang constantly as the story spread across news platforms. Sir Marcus said into his Bluetooth headset while typing frantically on his laptop, "The Wall Street Journal wants a statement. CNN is sending a crew to the airport, and the NAACP has released a press statement supporting your actions." Damon's voice came through clearly from the aircraft phone. "Draft a statement for immediate release. Phoenix Airways is under new management, committed to equal treatment for all passengers regardless of race, religion, or economic status. Zero tolerance for discrimination, effective immediately." But the media attention was creating problems beyond public relations. Tyler Blackstone's arrest was being covered by every major news outlet, and his family's Blackstone Hotels was scrambling to distance themselves from their son's behavior. The stock price of Blackstone Hotels had dropped 12% in the 2 hours since the live stream began. Tyler's father, Robert Blackstone, was watching the coverage from his Manhattan office with his team of crisis management lawyers. "Get my son the best criminal defense attorney available," he ordered, "and cancel all our service agreements with Phoenix Airways immediately. We can't be associated with this disaster." What Robert Blackstone didn't know was that Damon had already terminated their contracts. Phoenix Airways would no longer provide VIP flight services for Blackstone Hotels guests, and the hotel chain would need to find new aviation partners for their luxury travel packages. Back on Flight 447, the passengers were beginning to process the implications of what they'd witnessed. Mr. Richardson, the frequent flyer who had initially remained silent, approached Damon's seat. "Mr. Rivers, I owe you an apology," Richardson said quietly. "I've seen this kind of treatment before on flights, and I've never spoken up. I told myself it wasn't my business. Tonight I realized that silence makes me complicit. I appreciate that, Mr. Richardson. But this isn't about individual apologies. It's about changing a culture that allows discrimination to happen in the first place." The Hispanic businessman from seat 4B, who had introduced himself as attorney Miguel Santos, was documenting everything on his tablet. "Mr. Rivers, I represent several civil rights organizations. Would you be willing to work with us to establish industry-wide standards for passenger treatment?" "Absolutely." But let's start with Phoenix Airways and prove that change is possible. Sophia was providing her viewers with real-time updates as news broke. Breaking news: Blackstone Hotels stock is down 12%. The company just released a statement distancing themselves from Tyler Blackstone's behavior and announcing that they're reviewing all business partnerships. She panned her camera across the cabin. The atmosphere here has completely transformed. Passengers who initially just wanted to get to Los Angeles are now part of a movement for airline accountability. Captain Sarah Bennett's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure. I want to personally apologize for the events that occurred during boarding. As captain, I should have investigated more thoroughly before supporting the crew's actions. I take full responsibility for my role in this incident." Damon picked up the cabin phone. "Captain Bennett, this is Damon Rivers. Your apology is noted, but we'll be having a comprehensive discussion about tonight's events when we land." "Yes, sir. I understand." The young white couple in seats 3A and 3C who had been recording the incident posted their video to TikTok with the caption, "When you accidentally document the most important civil rights moment in aviation history." Within an hour, their video had been shared over 1 million times. As Flight 447 finally pushed back from the gate, the story was trending on every social media platform. Hashtag Flight 447 had been joined by hashtag Airline Accountability, hashtag Phoenix Airways Owner, and hashtag Never Again. The incident was being discussed on cable news shows, analyzed by legal experts, and held up as an example of how individual actions could create widespread change. But for all the media attention and social media buzz, the most important changes were happening quietly in corporate offices around the country. Other airlines were emergency reviewing their customer service policies. Training departments were updating their discrimination protocols. CEOs were asking uncomfortable questions about how their own employees treated passengers of color. Sophia wrapped up her live stream as the aircraft began taxiing. "We're about to take off, so I'll be signing off for now. But this story is far from over. What started as routine travel documentation has become a moment that will be studied and remembered. Thank you for witnessing this with me. Change is possible, but only when we refuse to stay silent." As she ended the stream, her final viewer count showed 87,000 people had watched Phoenix Airways' transformation live. But the real impact would be measured not in views or shares, but in how many people decided they would never again stay silent when they witnessed discrimination. Flight 447 lifted off from Chicago, carrying more than passengers. It carried a promise that airlines could do better and a warning that customers were watching. As Flight 447 climbed to cruising altitude above the Midwest, the real magnitude of what had occurred was beginning to register across the aviation industry. In executive boardrooms from New York to Los Angeles, airline CEOs were demanding immediate reviews of their customer service protocols. The live-streamed discrimination incident had exposed a problem that everyone knew existed but no one wanted to acknowledge publicly. At Phoenix Airways headquarters in Phoenix, Arizona, the emergency board meeting had been in session for 3 hours. The conference room was filled with terminal tension as board members tried to comprehend how their company had become the center of a national civil rights incident. Board Chairman Arthur Wellington, 72, was struggling to maintain order. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said. His voice strained. "Our head flight attendant discriminated against a passenger called security to have him removed from his paid seat. And then we discovered that the passenger owns our company." Chief Operating Officer Patricia Morse nodded grimly. The acquisition was finalized this afternoon, but the announcement wasn't scheduled until tomorrow morning. None of our crew knew about the ownership change. How bad is the media coverage? Marketing Director James Fletcher pulled up news feeds on his laptop. Every major network is running the story. The live stream video has been viewed over 2 million times. Hashtag Flight 447 is trending globally. And, sir, We're being held up as either the worst example of airline discrimination or the best example of corporate accountability, depending on the perspective. Wellington rubbed his temples. What's the stock impact? Phoenix Airways stock is up 14% since the story broke, Fletcher reported. Investors are responding positively to the new ownership and the promise of reform. But the positive market response was cold comfort to the board members who had just learned they were all unemployed. Damon Rivers had been clear full board termination effective immediately. They were in their final hours of corporate authority. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet, the cabin of Flight 447 had become a flying think tank for airline reform. Passengers were sharing stories, exchanging contact information, and discussing ways to ensure that what they'd witnessed would lead to lasting change. Miguel Santos, the attorney, was drafting a letter to the Department of Transportation requesting a comprehensive review of airline discrimination policies. Mr. Richardson was writing his own letter to the frequent flyer programs he'd been part of for decades, demanding diversity training for all customer service staff. The young couple from seats 3A and 3C, Sarah and Mike Thompson, no relation to Damon's assistant Marcus Thompson, were organizing a social media campaign to collect and document airline discrimination experiences. Their hashtag Speak Up in the Sky was already gaining traction. Susan Williams, the new head flight attendant, approached Damon's seat with a tablet. Mr. Rivers, I've been authorized to share some preliminary information about Phoenix Airways' customer service history, if you'd like to review it during the flight. Damon accepted the tablet and began scrolling through complaint data. The numbers were disturbing but not surprising. Complaints from passengers of color were 300% more likely to be dismissed as misunderstandings. First-class seating disputes involving race occurred at twice the industry average. Customer service training included no specific anti-discrimination protocols. Susan, how long have you been with Phoenix Airways? 12 years, sir. I've worked my way up from economy to first class, mostly on international routes. Have you witnessed incidents like tonight's? Before Susan paused, choosing her words carefully. Yes, sir. More often than I'd like to admit. The culture has been problematic. Why didn't anyone speak up? Fear of retaliation, sir. Crew members who questioned discriminatory practices were often assigned to less desirable routes or had their schedules cut. The message was clear. Don't make waves. Damon made notes on the tablet. The scope of the problem was larger than one flight crew or one incident. It was embedded in the company culture, reinforced by policies that prioritized certain passengers over others and enabled by leadership that looked the other way. Sophia Martinez, who had been quiet during the early part of the flight, began a new live stream as they crossed into Colorado airspace. We're about 3 hours from Los Angeles, and I wanted to give you an update on the most incredible flight I've ever been on. She panned her camera across the cabin, showing passengers engaged in animated conversations about civil rights airline policies and corporate responsibility. This cabin has become a flying civil rights symposium. Passengers are organizing planning and refusing to let this moment pass without action. Tyler Blackstone was conspicuously absent from these conversations. He had been removed from the aircraft in handcuffs and was currently processing through the Chicago Police Department booking system. His mugshot would be on TMZ within hours, and his trust fund would be frozen pending the outcome of both criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Victoria Ashworth was also absent, but her story was spreading across aviation industry forums. Her termination had been swift and public, and her name was now associated with one of the most documented cases of airline discrimination in history. The aviation industry was small and interconnected. She would never work for a major carrier again. Captain Sarah Bennett had maintained professional composure throughout the flight, but privately she was calculating the cost of her decision to support Victoria's discrimination call. Her 20-year career was likely over her pilot's license under review, and her reputation permanently linked to enabling bias. As Flight 447 began its initial descent into Los Angeles, the scope of change was becoming clear. This wasn't just about one airline or one incident. The viral nature of the story had created a watershed moment for the entire industry. Airlines across the country were implementing emergency policy changes. United announced mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees. Delta established an anonymous discrimination reporting system. American Airlines hired a chief diversity officer with direct CEO access. But the most significant change was happening among passengers themselves. People were no longer willing to be silent witnesses to discrimination. They were filming, sharing, and demanding accountability in real time. Flight 447 was still an hour from landing, but it had already changed aviation history forever. Los Angeles International Airport at 11:47 p.m. was a different world than the storm-delayed chaos of Chicago O'Hare. The California terminal was quieter, with most of the evening's domestic flights having already arrived. But Terminal 4, where Phoenix Airways operated, was buzzing with unusual activity. News vans lined the arrival area. Reporters with camera crews waited behind security barriers. Airport security had established crowd control measures for what they expected to be a chaotic arrival of the flight that had become a global news story. As Flight 447 touched down on runway 24L, the passengers could see the media circus through the aircraft windows. Spotlights illuminated the tarmac, and camera crews tracked the aircraft's taxi to the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Bennett announced we've arrived at Los Angeles International Airport. Given the events of this evening and the media attention surrounding our flight, airport security will be managing the deplaning process. Mr. Rivers has requested to address the passengers before we disembark." Damon Rivers stood in the first-class cabin looking at the faces of people who had become accidental civil rights witnesses. These weren't activists or protesters. They were business travelers, tourists, and ordinary passengers who had found themselves part of an extraordinary moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, Damon began 6 hours ago. You boarded what you thought was a routine flight to Los Angeles. Instead, you became witnesses to something that should never happen in 2024, but unfortunately still does. You saw discrimination in action. But more importantly, you saw people who refused to stay silent." He looked at Mr. Richardson. "You saw courage from passengers who could have remained comfortable in their seats but chose to speak up." His gaze moved to Miguel Santos. "You saw people who turned witness into action." He nodded to Sofia Martinez. "And you saw the power of documentation and truth-telling in the digital age." Sofia was live-streaming the speech to over 150,000 viewers worldwide. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, with viewers thanking the passengers for their courage and demanding similar accountability from other airlines. "Phoenix Airways will be different," Damon continued. "Not because of what happened tonight, but because of what we choose to do next. We will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination policies in the aviation industry. We will train our staff to see passengers as individuals, not stereotypes. And we will create systems that ensure tonight's events never happen again." He paused, looking around the cabin. "But change can't happen in isolation. Other airlines need to see that passengers demand better. Other passengers need to know that discrimination will not be tolerated. And other employees need to understand that there are consequences for treating people with disrespect." Miguel Santos raised his hand. "Mr. Rivers, what specific policies will you implement?" "Zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Immediate termination for any employee who treats passengers differently based on race, religion, or appearance. Anonymous reporting systems so employees and passengers can report bias without fear of retaliation. Monthly diversity audits of all customer service interactions. And partnership with civil rights organizations to ensure our policies are meaningful, not just window dressing. Sarah Thompson." Half of the young couple who had filmed the incident asked Will, Other airlines follow your lead. That depends on whether passengers demand it. Tonight proved that customers have power when they use it. Every time you fly, you choose which airline gets your money. Make that choice count. Susan Williams approached with a tablet. Mr. Rivers, we have a problem. The Phoenix Airways Board of Directors is requesting an emergency meeting. They're not happy about the public termination announcement. Damon smiled grimly. They're not the Board of Directors anymore. As of this morning, I own 78% of Phoenix Airways stock. I am the Board of Directors. The revelation sent another wave of amazement through the cabin. Sophia addressed her live stream audience. For those keeping track, not only does he own the airline that discriminated against him, but he also has the corporate authority to make immediate changes without board approval. The aircraft door opened, and LAX security personnel entered the cabin. Behind them came Marcus Thompson, Damon's assistant, with a team of lawyers and Phoenix Airways executives who had flown in from the company's headquarters. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, Mr. Rivers will be conducting brief interviews with major news outlets. For passengers who are willing to share their experiences from tonight's flight, we have counselors and legal representatives available to assist you. Miguel Santos immediately stepped forward. I'll speak with any media outlet that wants a legal perspective on tonight's events. Mr. Richardson nodded. I've been silent too long. It's time to use my voice. Sophia packed up her live streaming equipment. I've been documenting this story for hours. I'm not stopping now. As passengers began to disembark, each person was greeted by Phoenix Airways executives who personally apologized for the discrimination they had witnessed. No one was rushed off the aircraft. No one's concerns were dismissed. It was customer service, as it should be respectful, attentive, and equal for everyone. But the most significant moment came as Damon prepared to leave the aircraft. Captain Sarah Bennett, who had remained in the cockpit during his speech, appeared at the door to the cabin. Mr. Rivers, she said quietly, I need to speak with you privately. Captain Bennett, I think our conversation should be public. The passengers deserve to hear what you have to say. Bennett looked around the cabin at the remaining passengers and media representatives. You're right. She took a deep breath. Mr. Rivers, I failed as a captain tonight. When my crew reported a passenger issue, I should have investigated personally instead of taking their word. I enabled discrimination through my inaction. What would you do differently? I would have talked to all parties involved. I would have reviewed the actual facts instead of accepting my crew's biased interpretation. And I would have recognized that crew solidarity is meaningless if the crew is wrong. Damon studied her for a long moment. Captain Bennett, you'll be participating in our new training program. You'll also be flying with diverse crews and receiving monthly evaluations. This is your one chance to prove that tonight was a learning experience, not a character revelation. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As the last passengers left Flight 447, Damon Rivers stood alone in the first-class cabin where just hours earlier he had been threatened with arrest for sitting in a seat he had legitimately purchased. Now he was the owner of an airline, the leader of a corporate transformation, and reluctantly the face of a movement for aviation equality. Outside the aircraft, reporters were waiting with cameras rolling and questions prepared. The story of Flight 447 was no longer just about one incident of discrimination. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people refused to accept injustice as normal. The revolution in airline customer service was about to go public in a way that would change the industry forever. The Phoenix Airways executive conference room at LAX was hastily assembled in a vacant gate area with laptops, tablets, and phones scattered across folding tables. It was past midnight, but the emergency corporate restructuring session was just beginning. News crews waited outside, while inside Damon Rivers was methodically dismantling 2 decades of discriminatory culture. Let's start with the crew from Flight 447, Damon said, addressing the room of corporate lawyers, HR representatives, and aviation executives. Victoria Ashworth terminated for cause forfeiture of all benefits, banned from rehire. Jake Morrison terminated for enabling discrimination. Rebecca Walsh, gate agent, terminated for initiating discriminatory alert. Phoenix Airways former HR director Patricia Wells tried to intervene. Mr. Rivers' company policy requires a formal investigation before termination. We need to follow proper procedures to avoid wrongful termination lawsuits. Patricia Damon replied calmly, "You're fired too. Your HR policies enabled this discrimination by making it easier to dismiss complaints than address them." Marcus Thompson was taking detailed notes while coordinating with Apex Ventures' legal team via video conference. "Sir, we have documentation of 17 formal complaints against Victoria Ashworth in the past 3 years. All were dismissed as misunderstandings or communication issues. The pattern is clear." "What about the captain?" asked James Fletcher, the former marketing director who was nervously realizing his own job was in jeopardy. "Captain Bennett will receive comprehensive retraining and probationary status. She showed poor judgment, but demonstrated accountability. That's more than I can say for the rest of the leadership team." Damon turned to address the full room. "Phoenix Airways has operated with a culture of discrimination disguised as premium service. You've created policies that favor certain passengers while disregarding others. You've trained employees to make assumptions based on appearance rather than treat all customers with respect." He pulled up a presentation on his laptop, projecting it onto the portable screen Marcus had set up. "Here's what we discovered in just 6 hours of investigation. Customer complaints from passengers of color are resolved 40% slower than complaints from white passengers. First-class seating disputes involving race are 3 times more likely to result in passenger removal. Employee training materials include coded language that essentially teaches bias. The statistics were damning, but they weren't surprising to anyone who had worked in the industry. What was surprising was that someone with the power to fix the problems was actually doing it." Effective immediately, we're implementing the Phoenix Protocol. Damon continued. "Zero tolerance for discrimination. 1 incident, immediate termination. Anonymous reporting system with investigations handled by external civil rights attorneys. Quarterly bias training for all customer-facing employees conducted by diversity professionals, not internal staff." Marketing Director Fletcher raised his hand nervously. "What about our VIP program? We have business relationships with major corporations, celebrity clients, government officials. They expect preferential treatment. They'll receive excellent service just like every other passenger. The difference is that excellent service will no longer be contingent on skin color," Fletcher persisted. "But what about passengers like Tyler Blackstone? His family's business relationships are terminated." Damon cut him off. "Blackstone Hotels is banned from Phoenix Airways partnerships. Any company that expects us to discriminate against other passengers to accommodate their preferences is not a customer we want." Legal counsel Robert Hayes looked concerned. "Mr. Rivers, that decision could cost us millions in corporate partnerships." "Robert, you're fired. Any lawyer who thinks profits are more important than civil rights shouldn't be representing this company." The room was growing quieter as executives realized that their careers were ending one by one. Damon wasn't just firing the crew from Flight 447, he was cleaning house completely. Operations Director Martinez, you oversaw the scheduling policies that systematically assigned diverse crew members to less desirable routes. Fired. Chief Financial Officer Williams, you approved budget cuts that eliminated diversity training. Fired. Customer Service Director Thompson, you implemented the complaint resolution policies that buried discrimination reports. Fired. Marcus was struggling to keep up with the terminations. "Sir, we're going to need to hire an entire new executive team. We're going to hire the right executive team. People who understand that customer service means serving all customers equally." In the media area outside the conference room, Sophia Martinez was providing live updates to news outlets around the world. "The corporate restructuring is unprecedented," she reported. "In one night, Phoenix Airways has gone from a discrimination scandal to a template for industry reform." But the changes weren't just happening at the executive level. Down in the employee break room, Phoenix Airways staff were watching the news coverage and realizing that the culture they'd operated in for years was over. Some were relieved employees who had witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to report it. Others were worried about their own jobs if they had participated in or enabled biased treatment. Flight attendant Monica Rodriguez, who had worked for Phoenix Airways for 8 years, was texting with colleagues. "Everything's changing. They're actually firing people for discrimination. I can't believe it's real." Ground crew supervisor David Park was having similar conversations. "Maybe we can finally treat all passengers like human beings instead of walking credit scores." Back in the conference room, Damon was wrapping up the termination session. "For those of you who remain employed by Phoenix Airways, understand this: you are now representatives of a company that values dignity, respect, and equality. If you can't operate under those principles, submit your resignation tonight." 3 more executives stood up and walked out, effectively resigning rather than working under the new standards. "Good," Damon said as the door closed behind them. "Marcus, start recruiting immediately. I want a diverse executive team in place within 30 days. I want people who understand that our customers come from every background, every economic level, and every race." "Yes, sir." "And, sir, what the news coverage is overwhelmingly positive. Phoenix Airways stock is up 22% since the story broke. Apparently, investors like companies that treat people fairly." As the emergency session ended and executives filed out to face the media or clean out their offices, Damon Rivers sat alone in the hastily assembled conference room. In less than 12 hours, he had gone from being a discrimination victim to the catalyst for the largest corporate culture change in aviation history. The hardest part wasn't firing the people who had enabled discrimination. The hardest part would be rebuilding a company culture that had been broken for decades. But for the first time in Phoenix Airways history, they had leadership that believed all passengers deserved respect. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. At 2:17 a.m. Pacific Time in a Phoenix, Arizona boardroom, lit by emergency lighting and fueled by crisis energy, the former Phoenix Airways Board of Directors was conducting their final meeting. The conference table that had hosted 20 years of strategic decisions was now the site of corporate surrender. Chairman Arthur Wellington's hands shook slightly as he reviewed the acquisition documents that Marcus Thompson had emailed to all board members. The signatures were legitimate, the financing was verified, and the transfer of ownership was legally ironclad. Phoenix Airways belonged to Damon Rivers, and their authority had ended the moment the ink dried. "Gentlemen, ladies," Wellington began, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. "We are no longer the governing body of this corporation. Mr. Rivers owns 78% of outstanding shares, which gives him unilateral control over all company decisions." Board member Catherine Morrison, who had served for 15 years, was struggling to process the situation. "Arthur, how did we not know about this acquisition? We should have been notified before any sale was finalized." "Because we weren't selling," Wellington replied grimly. Apex Ventures purchased shares through a series of complex market transactions over the past 6 months. They accumulated controlling interest without triggering disclosure requirements until the final purchase this afternoon. Chief Financial Officer William Hayes, one of the few executives who hadn't been fired during the LAX conference room session, participated via video conference from Los Angeles. The acquisition was perfectly legal and brilliantly executed. They bought minority positions through shell companies, pension funds, and institutional investors. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. Board member Robert Chen reviewed his tablet, scrolling through news coverage. "The media response is actually positive. Our stock price has increased 24% since the story broke. Investors are responding favorably to the new ownership and the promise of corporate reform." "How is that possible?" Morrison asked. "We're in the middle of a discrimination scandal because the new owner handled it correctly," Wellington admitted reluctantly. Instead of denying, minimizing, or making excuses, he immediately fired everyone responsible and implemented comprehensive policy changes. The market loves decisive leadership. General Counsel Linda Foster, participating by phone from her Chicago office, provided the legal perspective. From a liability standpoint, Mr. Rivers' actions have actually protected the company. By immediately terminating discriminatory employees and implementing new policies, he's demonstrating that discrimination was not company policy, but individual misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The discrimination incident that could have destroyed Phoenix Airways was actually strengthening the company under new leadership. Board member James Patterson, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "Maybe this is for the best. We've known about customer service problems for years. We've received complaints about discriminatory treatment. But we prioritized profits over people, and we enabled a culture that treated some passengers as more valuable than others." Wellington's jaw tightened. "James, we ran a profitable airline that served millions of passengers safely and efficiently. We ran an airline that discriminated against passengers based on their appearance," Patterson corrected. "Tonight's incident wasn't an anomaly. It was the predictable result of policies we approved and culture we fostered." Morrison was reading through customer complaint data that Hayes had provided. "My God, the numbers are worse than I thought. We have documentation of hundreds of incidents where passengers of color were treated differently, questioned about their tickets, or subjected to additional security measures. Those were isolated incidents," Wellington protested weakly. Arthur Hayes interrupted from the video conference. "I've been reviewing complaint patterns with the new ownership team. The incidents were neither isolated nor accidental. We had staff who were essentially trained to suspect certain passengers. The weight of that revelation settled over the room. For years, they had dismissed discrimination complaints as misunderstandings or exaggerations. Now they were confronting evidence that their own policies had enabled bias." Foster's voice came through the conference phone board members. "I need to advise you that there may be legal exposure for individuals who were aware of discriminatory practices and failed to address them. The new ownership has indicated they'll be conducting comprehensive reviews of all board decisions related to customer service policies." Wellington closed his laptop and looked around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, our tenure with Phoenix Airways is over. Mr. Rivers has made it clear that he's conducting a complete corporate restructuring. We are no longer employees of this company." The meeting concluded with handshakes that felt more like funeral goodbyes than business farewells. 20 years of corporate relationships were ending in a sterile conference room at 2:43 a.m. As board members gathered their belongings and prepared to face an uncertain professional future, the irony of the situation was inescapable. The discrimination incident that was supposed to remove an undesirable passenger from first class had instead removed them from the company entirely. Phoenix Airways would continue flying, serving passengers, and generating profits. But it would do so under leadership that believed all customers deserved respect, regardless of how they looked or where they sat. The revolution was complete. The old Phoenix Airways was dead. The new Phoenix Airways was about to be born. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, the passengers from Flight 447 were discovering that their accidental involvement in aviation history was just the beginning of their story. The 6 hours they'd spent witnessing discrimination and corporate accountability had transformed them from travelers into activists, from bystanders into advocates for change. Mr. Richardson, the 65-year-old frequent flyer who had initially remained silent, was sitting in his Century City hotel room, composing what would become one of the most widely shared passenger letters in airline history. His arthritis made typing difficult, but his message was crystal clear. "For 40 years, I have flown over 3 million miles on various airlines. I have maintained elite status, received VIP treatment, and enjoyed the privileges that come with frequent travel. But last night I witnessed something that made me realize my silence has been complicity. I watched a paying passenger be discriminated against solely because of his race. I watched crew members assume that a black man couldn't possibly belong in first class. And I said nothing until other passengers shamed me into action. My platinum status, my VIP treatment, my comfortable silence, all of it was built on a system that values some passengers more than others. I am ashamed that it took witnessing blatant discrimination to open my eyes to subtler forms of bias I've been ignoring for decades. Richardson's letter would be published in the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, and eventually translated into 12 languages as airlines around the world grappled with passenger discrimination. Meanwhile, Sophia Martinez was in her downtown LA apartment editing footage from her 47,000-person live stream for a documentary film. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since landing interview requests from CNN, the BBC, Good Morning America, and civil rights organizations around the world. I've been creating travel content for 5 years, Sophia explained to her documentary camera. I thought I was just documenting a delay and some customer service drama. Instead, I captured the moment when corporate America decided that discrimination has consequences. Her footage would become crucial evidence in federal investigations into airline discrimination practices. More importantly, it would inspire passengers on other airlines to document their own experiences and demand equal treatment. Miguel Santos, the attorney from Seat 4B, was already forming a legal coalition. From his hotel room, he was coordinating with civil rights lawyers across the country to establish the Airline Passenger Equality Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to monitoring and addressing discrimination in commercial aviation. What happened on Flight 447 isn't unique, Santos explained in a video conference with colleagues from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It's just the first time it was documented so comprehensively and handled so decisively by corporate leadership. The young couple Sarah and Mike Thompson had created a website called speakupinthesky.org, where passengers could anonymously report discrimination experiences. Within 24 hours of launching, they had received over 500 detailed reports of biased treatment on airlines across the United States. We realized that everyone has a story, Sarah explained in an interview with Aviation Industry magazine. The difference is that most people suffer in silence, file complaints that get dismissed, or simply accept that discrimination is part of flying while black or brown. Their website would eventually become a crucial resource for federal regulators investigating industry-wide discrimination patterns. But the most unexpected passenger response came from Tyler Blackstone's own first-class section. The elderly woman who had been sitting in Seat 5A, Dorothy Williams, was an 82-year-old retired civil rights activist who had remained quiet during the incident but was processing what she'd witnessed. Dorothy had been part of the Freedom Riders in 1961. She'd faced down segregation on buses, trains, and in airports across the American South. Watching the events on Flight 447 had brought back memories of fights she thought were long over. Young people think discrimination is history, Dorothy told reporters gathered at LAX. They think because we don't have separate water fountains, the problem is solved. But bias evolves. It gets subtler, more polite, more deniable. What happened last night was 1950s prejudice in 2024 packaging. Dorothy's perspective provided crucial historical context for news coverage. Her presence on the flight, a civil rights veteran witnessing modern discrimination, created a powerful narrative link between past and present struggles for equality. The passengers' collective response was creating ripple effects throughout the travel industry. Hotels, restaurants, car rental companies, and cruise lines were all reviewing their customer service policies in light of the Phoenix Airways incident. Blackstone Hotels, already distancing themselves from Tyler's behavior, announced a comprehensive review of their customer service training. Marriott International implemented new bias reporting systems. Even Uber and Lyft created passenger equality initiatives. But the most significant response was coming from passengers themselves. Social media was flooded with stories of airline discrimination that had previously gone unreported. Hashtag Speak Up in the Sky was trending globally, with travelers sharing experiences and demanding accountability. Flight attendants were also speaking up. Current and former airline employees were sharing their own stories of being pressured to treat passengers differently based on appearance, accent, or perceived economic status. A Phoenix Airways flight attendant using the anonymous handle at Sky Service Truth posted a thread that went viral. "I've been a flight attendant for 12 years. I've been told to watch certain passengers more closely, to question first-class tickets held by people of color to provide slower service to passengers who don't look like they belong. Management called it revenue protection. I called it racism." The thread included screenshots of internal training materials that essentially coached employees in legal discrimination techniques. As the 24-hour news cycle continued to cover the Flight 447 story, the passengers found themselves at the center of a movement they had never intended to start. Their decision to speak up during 6 hours of discrimination had sparked a nationwide conversation about equality, dignity, and corporate responsibility. Mr. Richardson summed up the collective passenger experience in his letter. "We boarded Flight 447 as strangers planning to travel in comfortable silence. We deplaned as a community committed to ensuring that silence is never again mistaken for consent when basic human dignity is under attack." The passengers had accidentally become civil rights activists, and they were discovering that accidental activism could be just as powerful as the intentional kind. 48 hours after Flight 447 landed at LAX, Phoenix Airways headquarters in Tempe, Arizona, resembled a corporate war room more than an airline office. Every conference room was occupied by consultants, civil rights attorneys, diversity trainers, and newly hired executives working around the clock to transform a company culture that had taken decades to establish. Damon Rivers hadn't slept more than 4 hours since the incident, but his energy was sustained by something more powerful than caffeine: the knowledge that meaningful change was actually possible. He stood in the main conference room surrounded by whiteboards covered in organizational charts, policy frameworks, and implementation timelines. "Marcus, give me the 48-hour report," Damon said, reviewing the tablets and laptops scattered across the conference table. Marcus Thompson looked exhausted but triumphant. "Sir, we've hired 12 new executives, implemented emergency policy changes at all 47 airports where Phoenix Airways operates, and mandated immediate bias training for 8,200 customer-facing employees. Training completion rate 87% and climbing. Employees who refuse training are being terminated. We've lost about 40 staff members who either quit or were fired for non-compliance. Dr. Angela Foster, the newly hired Chief Diversity Officer and former NAACP Legal Defense Fund attorney, approached with her preliminary assessment. Mr. Rivers, the scope of the cultural problem was worse than we initially realized. I've reviewed complaint files, employee communications, and training materials. This wasn't just individual bias, it was institutional discrimination disguised as customer service excellence." She pulled up a presentation on the main screen. "We found coded language in training materials that essentially taught employees to profile passengers. Terms like revenue protection, client verification, and service tier assessment were all euphemisms for treating certain passengers with suspicion." Damon studied the slides showing training screenshots and internal memos. "How did this happen without legal challenge?" "Because complaints were systematically suppressed," Dr. Foster explained. "We found evidence of over 400 discrimination complaints over the past 3 years that were classified as misunderstandings and buried without investigation. Passengers were offered small compensations in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. The revelation was damaging, but it also provided a roadmap for comprehensive reform. Every suppressed complaint was being reopened, Every NDA was being voluntarily dissolved. Every passenger who had been discriminated against was being contacted with offers of restitution and testimony opportunities. Chief Operating Officer Maria Gonzalez, hired from Southwest Airlines for her reputation in inclusive leadership, was coordinating the operational changes. "We've completely overhauled crew assignments," she reported. Previously diverse crew members were systematically assigned to economy cabins and less desirable routes. That's been eliminated. All crew assignments are now merit-based with rotation requirements. "What about the VIP program?" Damon asked. "Restructured completely. Previous VIP benefits were largely based on family wealth corporate connections or personal relationships with staff. The new program is purely transaction-based frequent flyer miles, spending levels, and length of customer relationship. No subjective criteria." The changes weren't just happening in executive offices. Down in the Employee Training Center, 200 Phoenix Airways staff members were participating in the most comprehensive anti-bias training program in aviation history. The sessions weren't corporate feel-good workshops. They were intensive, uncomfortable examinations of unconscious bias led by civil rights experts. Flight attendant supervisor Janet Morrison was one of the employees going through retraining. "I've been with Phoenix Airways for 15 years, she explained to the training facilitator. "I honestly thought I was providing good customer service. I didn't realize I was making assumptions about passengers based on their appearance." The training program included video scenarios, role-playing exercises, and most powerfully testimonials from passengers who had experienced discrimination. Victoria Ashworth's treatment of Damon Rivers was used as a case study in how bias could escalate from microaggressions to overt discrimination. Meanwhile, the legal and financial implications of the transformation were becoming clear. Chief Financial Officer David Park, hired from JetBlue for his experience in crisis financial management, was managing the costs of comprehensive reform. "The immediate costs are significant," Park reported. Severance for terminated employees, legal settlements for past discrimination, victims' consulting fees for training programs, and hiring costs for new staff. "We're looking at approximately $47 million in transformation expenses and the long-term financial impact." Positive. Customer satisfaction scores are up 30% in 2 days. Booking requests have increased 42%. We're receiving partnership inquiries from corporations that specifically want to work with airlines that prioritize equality. The discrimination incident that could have destroyed the company has actually strengthened our market position. The story was dominating aviation industry coverage, but the reporting was overwhelmingly positive. Phoenix Airways wasn't just recovering from a scandal, they were becoming the gold standard for corporate accountability. Aviation consultant James Wright, quoted in the Wall Street Journal, captured the industry perspective. "Phoenix Airways has done something unprecedented. Instead of crisis management, they chose crisis opportunity. They're not just fixing a problem, they're setting a new industry standard." But the most significant changes were happening at the individual level. Employees who had witnessed or participated in discriminatory practices were grappling with their role in perpetuating bias. Gate agent supervisor Carol Hughes, who had worked with Rebecca Walsh, the agent who had profiled Damon at O'Hare, was struggling with her own complicity. "I knew Rebecca had problems with certain passengers," Hughes admitted in her retraining session. "I told myself it wasn't my business. Now I realize that my silence enabled discrimination." The new anonymous reporting system was generating dozens of reports daily. Employees were documenting instances of bias they had witnessed, participated in, or been pressured to ignore. Each report was being investigated by external civil rights attorneys, ensuring independence and thoroughness. Flight attendant Carlos Rodriguez reported, "I was told by supervisors to pay closer attention to passengers who didn't look like they belonged in first class. When I asked what that meant, they said I'd know it when I saw it. I'm ashamed that I understood what they meant and followed those instructions." The cultural transformation was painful but necessary. Employees were confronting years of normalized bias and learning to see passengers as individuals rather than stereotypes. As the 48-hour transformation period concluded, Damon Rivers addressed all Phoenix Airways employees via company-wide video conference. 2 days ago, our airline discriminated against passengers based on their race. That discrimination was not the action of a few bad employees. It was the predictable result of policies and culture that this company had tolerated for years. Today, we begin again. We are no longer Phoenix Airways as it was. We are Phoenix Airways as it should be. We serve all passengers with equal respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or economic status. If you cannot commit to that standard, you are welcome to work elsewhere. The transformation wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about fundamentally changing how an entire company understood the relationship between service and dignity, and it was working. By the end of week 1, Phoenix Airways had received over 10,000 applications from job candidates who specifically wanted to work for an airline that prioritized equality. By the end of month 1, they would be the most requested airline among business travelers who valued diversity and inclusion. The revolution that had started in Seat 1A of Flight 447 was reshaping an entire industry, one policy change at a time. The transformation of Phoenix Airways sent shockwaves through the aviation industry that reached far beyond airline boardrooms. Within 1 week of the Flight 447 incident, the ripple effects were reshaping customer service standards across multiple industries and inspiring legislative action at the federal level. In Washington, D.C., Congresswoman Maria Santos, no relation to passenger, Miguel Santos announced that she was introducing the Airline Passenger Dignity Act comprehensive legislation requiring all commercial airlines to implement anti-discrimination training, maintain public databases of customer complaints, and face federal penalties for discriminatory practices. The Phoenix Airways incident exposed a problem that passengers of color have experienced for decades, Congresswoman Santos explained during a press conference on the steps of the Capitol. We can no longer rely on corporate goodwill to ensure equal treatment. We need federal standards with real enforcement mechanisms. The proposed legislation had bipartisan support, with Republican Senator James Mitchell of Wyoming co-sponsoring the bill. This isn't about political correctness, Senator Mitchell explained to reporters. This is about basic customer service standards and treating all Americans with dignity when they travel. Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation announced that it was launching a comprehensive review of customer service practices across all major airlines. Secretary of Transportation Linda Washington requested voluntary compliance reports from every carrier operating in the United States. The industry response was swift and decisive. Within 72 hours of the DOT announcement, American Airlines announced mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees. United Airlines established an Office of Customer Equality with direct reporting to the CEO. Delta Airlines implemented real-time customer service monitoring to identify discriminatory treatment patterns. But the changes weren't limited to aviation. The hospitality industry was also confronting its own bias issues in the wake of the Phoenix Airways story. Marriott International CEO David Rodriguez announced the implementation of dignity standards across all Marriott properties worldwide. The standards included bias training for all front desk staff, anonymous reporting systems for guests who experience discrimination, and regular audits of customer service interactions. The Phoenix Airways incident was a wake-up call for our entire industry, Rodriguez explained during a conference call with hotel industry executives. We cannot claim to provide hospitality while treating some guests as less welcome than others. Hilton Hotels followed with similar initiatives, as did major restaurant chains, car rental companies, and retail corporations. The hashtag Flight447 hashtag had evolved into a broader conversation about customer service equality across all consumer-facing businesses. The financial markets were responding positively to these changes. Companies that announced comprehensive anti-discrimination policies saw immediate stock price increases, while businesses that remained silent faced pressure from investors and consumers. Phoenix Airways' stock had risen 47% since the incident, making it one of the best-performing airline stocks of the year. More importantly, the company was receiving partnership offers from major corporations that wanted to align themselves with organizations prioritizing equality. Tech giant Microsoft announced a new corporate travel policy requiring all business partners to demonstrate commitment to customer service equality. We will not do business with companies that discriminate against our employees or customers based on race, religion, or appearance. Microsoft CEO Susan Chen stated during a company-wide meeting. The academic world was also responding. Harvard Business School announced that the Phoenix Airways case would be taught in all customer service and corporate leadership courses. Stanford University's Graduate School of Business established a fellowship program for studying discrimination in commercial settings. Professor Jennifer Martinez at UCLA's Anderson School of Management was leading a comprehensive study of bias in customer service interactions. The Phoenix Airways incident provided us with unprecedented documentation of how discrimination occurs, how it escalates, and how it can be addressed through decisive leadership, Professor Martinez explained. International attention was also growing. The European Union announced that it was reviewing customer service standards for all airlines operating in EU member countries. The Canadian Ministry of Transportation established a customer equality working group. Even Australia's Aviation Authority began requiring anti-discrimination training for all airline customer service staff. Perhaps most significantly, the incident had inspired individual employees across industries to speak up about discriminatory practices they had witnessed or been pressured to participate in. An anonymous Twitter account called at Service Industry Truth began sharing stories from workers in hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and service companies. The account documented systematic bias in customer service training, unwritten rules about treating certain customers differently, and pressure from management to maintain standards that were essentially discrimination disguised as business policy. One post that went viral came from a hotel front desk employee. We were trained to scrutinize reservations from people with ethnic-sounding names. Management called it verification procedures, but we all knew what it really meant. The Phoenix Airways story gave me courage to speak up. The ripple effects reached international media as well. The BBC produced a documentary about discrimination in commercial aviation. CNN International created a week-long series examining bias in customer service industries worldwide. The story had become a global conversation about equality, dignity, and corporate responsibility. But beyond the media coverage, legislative action, and corporate policy changes, the most important ripple effect was cultural. People were no longer willing to witness discrimination silently. Customers were demanding equal treatment. Employees were refusing to participate in biased practices. The revolution that began in Seat 1A had become a movement that was reshaping how entire industries understood the relationship between service and respect. 6 months after Flight 447 became a symbol of airline discrimination and corporate accountability, Phoenix Airways had transformed into something unprecedented in commercial aviation, an airline that passengers actually trusted to treat them with equal dignity. The Tempe headquarters buzzed with an energy that was noticeably different from the sterile corporate atmosphere that had previously defined the company. Diverse faces filled every department, from customer service to flight operations to executive leadership. The change wasn't cosmetic, it was fundamental. Chief Diversity Officer Dr. Angela Foster stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time customer service metrics from Phoenix Airways locations across the country. Every passenger interaction was tracked, analyzed, and evaluated for potential bias. The transparency was unprecedented in the industry. Our discrimination complaint rate has dropped 96% since the restructuring Dr. Foster reported during the monthly leadership meeting. More importantly, our customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry, with particular strength among passengers of color who historically experienced the poorest service. CEO Damon Rivers reviewed the data with satisfaction, but his focus remained on continuous improvement rather than celebration. What about employee retention? Are our new standards sustainable? Long-term Chief Operating Officer Maria Gonzalez provided the personnel update. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. Turnover has decreased 70% since we eliminated discriminatory practices and created clear, fair advancement opportunities. Employees report that they're proud to work for Phoenix Airways now. The pride was evident in every customer interaction. Flight attendants no longer made assumptions about passengers based on appearance. Gate agents treated every traveler with professional courtesy. Customer service representatives resolved complaints efficiently and fairly. But the transformation went beyond individual interactions. Phoenix Airways had become a destination employer for aviation professionals who valued diversity and inclusion. Applications had increased by 400%, with particular interest from employees of color who had felt marginalized at other airlines. Sofia Martinez, now Director of Customer Experience and Digital Innovation, had leveraged her 2.1 million social media followers to create the industry's most effective customer feedback system. Her Sky Stories platform allowed passengers to share their experiences in real time, creating immediate accountability for service quality. We receive about 500 customer stories daily, Sofia reported. 94% are positive, with passengers specifically commenting on the respectful, equal treatment they received regardless of their background or ticket class. The platform had become a model for other airlines, though none had achieved Phoenix Airways' level of customer satisfaction. The company's commitment to equality wasn't just good policy, it was excellent business. Financial performance had exceeded all projections. Phoenix Airways was now the most profitable airline in North America, with revenue growth of 67% since the restructuring. The premium pricing they commanded wasn't for exclusive service, it was for consistently excellent service, delivered without bias. Corporate clients are specifically requesting Phoenix Airways for business travel. Chief Financial Officer David Park reported. Companies want to partner with airlines that reflect their own diversity and inclusion values. The partnership opportunities had expanded beyond traditional airline business. Phoenix Airways was consulting with other companies on customer service equality, generating new revenue streams while advancing industry-wide change. Dr. Foster had also established the Phoenix Institute for Service Equality, a nonprofit organization that provided anti-bias training for businesses across multiple industries. Hotels, restaurants, retail companies, and service organizations were adopting Phoenix Airways training methods. We've trained over 50,000 employees at 200 companies in the past 6 months, Dr. Foster reported. Dr. Foster. The demand for equality training is unprecedented. Other industries watched what happened to our company and realized they needed to address their own bias issues proactively. The Institute had become self-sustaining, funded by training fees and corporate partnerships. More importantly, it was spreading the cultural changes pioneered by Phoenix Airways to companies around the world. Meanwhile, the employees who had been terminated for discriminatory behavior were experiencing very different consequences. Victoria Ashworth had been unable to find work in the airline industry and was currently enrolled in a community college program for social work, hoping to make amends for her past behavior. Tyler Blackstone had completed his jail sentence and community service, emerging with a fundamentally different perspective on privilege and entitlement. His family's hotel chain had implemented comprehensive bias training after losing multiple corporate partnerships, and Tyler was working as a front desk clerk to learn customer service from the ground up. I thought I was entitled to special treatment because of my family's wealth, Tyler explained during a voluntary interview with Sofia's Sky Stories platform. I learned that true customer service means treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. Captain Sarah Bennett had successfully completed her retraining and was now one of Phoenix Airways' most effective advocates for equality in aviation. Her experience of enabling discrimination had taught her to investigate thoroughly before making decisions that could affect passengers' dignity. But perhaps the most significant change was in the passengers themselves. Flying with Phoenix Airways had become a symbol of supporting equality and corporate responsibility. Passengers frequently commented that they felt respected and valued regardless of their seat assignment or ticket price. Mr. Richardson, the frequent flyer who had initially remained silent during the Flight 447 incident, was now a regular Phoenix Airways customer and vocal advocate for airline equality. "Flying with Phoenix Airways feels different," he explained in a testimonial video. "You're not judged, profiled, or categorized. You're simply served with professionalism and respect." 6 months after a discrimination incident had nearly destroyed the company, Phoenix Airways had become proof that corporate accountability and customer equality weren't just morally right, they were economically smart. The revolution that began in Seat 1A had created a new standard for an entire industry. On a sunny Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix, exactly 1 year after the Flight 447 incident, Damon Rivers stood before a crowd of civil rights leaders, business executives, and media representatives to announce the launch of the Rivers Foundation for Transportation Equality. The foundation would be funded with $500 million from his personal wealth, making it the largest private investment in transportation justice in American history. "A year ago, I experienced discrimination that millions of passengers face regularly, but rarely document," Damon explained to the assembled crowd. "Today, we're ensuring that discrimination becomes not just socially unacceptable, but financially impossible." The Foundation's mission was comprehensive legal advocacy for discrimination. Victims' free legal representation for bias-related cases, research into discriminatory practices across transportation industries, and grants for diversity initiatives at transportation companies worldwide. Dr. Angela Foster, who had taken a leave of absence from Phoenix Airways to serve as the Foundation's executive director, outlined the organization's 3 primary initiatives. The Legal Justice Project will provide free legal representation to anyone who experiences discrimination while traveling. We estimate this will help approximately 10,000 cases annually. The Research and Documentation Initiative will study bias patterns across airlines, trains, buses, ride-sharing services, and car rental companies. We'll publish annual reports that track industry progress and identify ongoing problems. The Corporate Partnership Program will provide grants and training to transportation companies that commit to measurable equality standards. We're not just fighting discrimination, we're incentivizing equality. The Foundation had already secured partnerships with major civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Civil Liberties Union. These partnerships would ensure that the Foundation's work reached communities that had historically faced the most discrimination. Sophia Martinez, who had been hired as the Foundation's Director of Digital Documentation, announced the launch of the National Transportation Bias Database, a comprehensive platform where passengers could report discriminatory experiences across all forms of commercial transportation. Within 1 hour of launching, we received 1,200 reports from passengers describing discriminatory treatment on airlines, trains, buses, and ride-sharing services, Sophia reported. These reports will be investigated by our legal team and shared with federal regulators to identify patterns requiring intervention. The database would also track positive experiences, highlighting companies that provided excellent service regardless of passenger demographics. The goal was to create market pressure for equality by making discriminatory practices visible and costly. Miguel Santos, the attorney who had witnessed the Flight 447 incident, had been hired as the Foundation's general counsel. His airline passenger equality project had merged with the Rivers Foundation, bringing together the most comprehensive legal advocacy network in transportation history. We've already filed 17 federal discrimination suits against airlines, bus companies, and car rental agencies, Santos reported. More importantly, we've reached settlement agreements with 23 companies that have agreed to implement comprehensive equality training and monitoring programs. The Foundation's research arm was led by Professor Jennifer Martinez from UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Her team was conducting the most comprehensive study of bias in commercial transportation ever undertaken. Our preliminary research indicates that passengers of color pay approximately 12% more for equivalent service due to discriminatory pricing, seating assignments, and additional fees, Professor Martinez explained. These findings will inform federal policy recommendations and legal advocacy efforts. Perhaps most significantly, the Foundation had inspired corporate philanthropy focused on equality and justice. Microsoft, Google, and Apple had each announced substantial donations to transportation equality initiatives. The Foundation's annual budget had grown to $200 million, making it a powerful force for change across multiple industries. This foundation exists because discrimination still happens every day in transportation, Damon concluded during the launch ceremony, but it also exists because change is possible when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. The goal isn't just to fight discrimination, it's to make discrimination so costly and socially unacceptable that it disappears entirely. As the ceremony concluded, attendees toured the Foundation's new headquarters, a state-of-the-art facility designed to coordinate legal advocacy research and corporate partnerships on a national scale. The revolution that began in Seat 1A had evolved into an institution dedicated to ensuring that every traveler could journey with dignity, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. Flight 447 from Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles International Airport was scheduled to depart on Thursday evening, exactly 1 year after the discrimination incident that had transformed the aviation industry. But this wasn't an ordinary flight. It was a carefully planned commemoration that would demonstrate how much had changed in 12 months. Damon Rivers sat in Seat 1A again, but this time he wasn't traveling incognito. The entire first-class cabin had been reserved for passengers and crew members who had been part of the original incident, along with civil rights leaders, journalists, and Phoenix Airways executives who had been hired during the company's transformation. The crew was led by Captain Maria Rodriguez, a Latina pilot who had been promoted to captain as part of Phoenix Airways' new merit-based advancement program. Her flight attendant team reflected the diversity that now defined the airline. Susan Williams, the professional black woman who had replaced Victoria Ashworth. David Kim, a Korean-American attendant who had previously been relegated to economy-only assignments, and Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Professor Martinez, a young Latina woman who represented the new generation of Phoenix Airways employees. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Phoenix Airways Flight 447, Captain Rodriguez announced. Today's flight is particularly meaningful as we commemorate 1 year of progress toward equality in commercial aviation. We're honored to serve passengers who helped transform our industry. Sophia Martinez, now Director of Customer Experience, but taking a personal day to document the anniversary flight, was live streaming to over 200,000 viewers worldwide. Her documentation of the original incident had won a Peabody Award for citizen journalism, and her continued advocacy had made her one of the most respected voices in transportation equality. A year ago, I boarded this same flight route expecting to create travel content Sophia narrated to her audience. Instead, I documented discrimination that sparked a revolution. Today, we're seeing what's possible when companies choose equality over exclusion. Mr. Richardson was also on board, sitting in the same seat 2A he had occupied during the original incident. Now 66, the frequent flyer had become an unexpected advocate for airline equality, using his platinum status and corporate connections to pressure other airlines to adopt Phoenix Airways standards. A year ago, I was silent when I should have spoken up. Richardson addressed Sophia's live stream audience. Today, I use my voice and my travel budget to support companies that treat all passengers with dignity. Change is possible, but only when privileged passengers demand equality for everyone. Miguel Santos, the attorney who had defended Damon during the original incident, was representing the civil rights organizations that had partnered with the Rivers Foundation. His legal advocacy had resulted in federal policy changes, including the Airline Passenger Dignity Act that had been signed into law 6 months earlier. This flight represents more than corporate redemption, Santos explained during Sophia's interview. It represents proof that discrimination can be eliminated through decisive leadership and comprehensive policy change. The passenger manifest also included several surprise guests. Dorothy Williams, the 82-year-old civil rights veteran who had witnessed the original incident, was accompanied by her granddaughter, a recent law school graduate who had been inspired by the events to specialize in transportation law. "My granddaughter learned that civil rights work isn't just history. It's happening right now," Dorothy explained. "The young people on this flight are carrying forward struggles that my generation started decades ago." But perhaps the most significant passenger was Tyler Blackstone, the entitled young man whose assault had led to his arrest and transformation. Tyler was traveling in economy. He could no longer afford first class after his family cut off his trust fund, but he had requested to be on the anniversary flight as part of his personal redemption journey. "I was the worst version of myself on this flight a year ago," Tyler explained to Sophia's camera during a pre-flight interview. "I've spent the past year learning about privilege entitlement and how my behavior affected other people. I'm here to apologize publicly and to show that even people like me can change." Tyler had completed his community service at a nonprofit organization serving homeless veterans, many of whom were people of color who had experienced discrimination in employment and housing. The experience had fundamentally changed his understanding of inequality and privilege. Working with people who had been denied opportunities because of their race taught me how much damage bias causes, Tyler continued. "I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the harm I caused." As the aircraft taxied for takeoff, Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight carries a special significance. 1 year ago, discrimination and corporate accountability collided in this cabin. Today, we're flying with a crew and passenger manifest that represents the equality and respect that should define commercial aviation." The takeoff was smooth, but the symbolism was powerful. As Flight 447 climbed into the evening sky above Chicago, passengers could see the city lights spreading endlessly below the same view that Damon Rivers had seen a year earlier, when he was being treated as an unwelcome intruder rather than a legitimate customer. "A year ago, I was threatened with arrest for sitting in a seat I had purchased." Damon addressed the cabin as they reached cruising altitude. "Tonight, I'm surrounded by people who proved that discrimination doesn't have to be tolerated, that corporate culture can be changed, and that individual actions can create widespread transformation." The anniversary flight wasn't just a commemoration, it was a demonstration that the revolution sparked by one incident of discrimination had created lasting, meaningful change that would benefit travelers for generations to come. As Flight 447 began its descent into Los Angeles, Damon Rivers stood in the first-class aisle to address the passengers who had become part of aviation history. The cabin lights were dimmed, and outside the windows, the lights of Los Angeles spread like stars across the California landscape. 1 year ago, I sat in this seat as a customer. Damon began, his voice carrying the weight of reflection and resolve. I was discriminated against, threatened with arrest, and physically assaulted, all for the crime of flying, while black in first class. Tonight, I stand here as the owner of an airline that has proven discrimination is not inevitable. It's a choice, and we chose differently. The passengers listened in respectful silence as Damon continued. But this story was never really about me. It was about every passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome, questioned about their right to be somewhere, or treated as suspicious simply because of their appearance. It was about every employee who was pressured to participate in bias, and every witness who chose silence over justice. He looked at Sophia Martinez, who was still documenting the flight for her global audience. Sophia showed us that in the age of social media, discrimination can't hide in the shadows anymore. When someone is treated unfairly, the whole world can witness it. That visibility creates accountability. His gaze moved to Mr. Richardson. This gentleman taught us that privilege comes with responsibility. When you have status, comfort, and respect, you have an obligation to ensure others receive the same treatment. Damon nodded toward Miguel Santos. Miguel demonstrated that legal advocacy isn't just about winning cases, it's about creating precedents that protect future victims and prevent future discrimination. Looking toward the economy section where Tyler Blackstone sat, Damon's expression softened. Tyler showed us that even people who cause harm can change when they're held accountable and given the opportunity to learn. Redemption is possible, but it requires genuine work and authentic transformation. But the real legacy of Flight 447 isn't what happened in this cabin, Damon continued. It's what happened afterward. Hundreds of companies reviewed their customer service policies. Thousands of employees received bias training. Millions of passengers learned they don't have to accept discrimination silently. Federal law now protects air travelers from discriminatory treatment. He paused, looking around the cabin at the diverse faces of passengers and crew members. Phoenix Airways is profitable, not despite our commitment to equality, but because of it. Treating all customers with respect isn't just morally right, it's economically smart. We've proven that companies can do well by doing good. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Los Angeles. The weather is clear, and we should be at the gate in approximately 15 minutes. As we prepare to land, Damon concluded, I want to leave you with this thought. Change doesn't require owning a company or having power. Change requires courage. The courage to speak up when you witness injustice. The courage to use whatever platform you have, whether it's social media, legal expertise, or simply your voice as a witness. The courage to demand better from the companies you support. He returned to his seat as the aircraft continued its descent. The revolution that began in Seat 1. A continues every time someone refuses to stay silent in the face of discrimination. Every time a passenger demands equal treatment. Every time an employee chooses fairness over bias. Every time a company prioritizes dignity over profits. Flight 447 proved that individual actions can create widespread change. That corporate accountability is possible. That equality isn't just an ideal, it's an achievable goal when people have the courage to demand it. As the wheels touched down at LAX, the passengers of Flight 447 carried with them not just memories of a transformative journey, but the responsibility to continue the work of creating a world where everyone can travel with dignity, respect, and equal treatment. The flight was over, but the movement it had inspired would continue for generations to come. This story resonates with me deeply because it represents something I believe we all crave, the moment when justice isn't just an ideal but a reality with immediate consequences. As someone who creates content about real-world issues, I'm struck by how Damon Rivers chose to handle his power. He could have simply fired Victoria and moved on protecting his own ego and company image. Instead, he used his platform to create systemic change that would protect every passenger who came after him. The most powerful moment isn't the revelation that he owns the airline. It's when he chooses to transform pain into purpose, using his authority not for revenge but for reform. That's the kind of leadership our world desperately needs. The real lesson here transcends airline policies and corporate restructuring. It's about the responsibility that comes with witness and power. Sophia Martinez teaches us that documenting injustice isn't enough. We must amplify voices and demand action, Mr. Richardson shows us that privilege means nothing if we don't use it to lift others up. Even Tyler Blackstone demonstrates that accountability can lead to genuine growth when people are willing to confront their own biases. but most importantly, Damon Rivers proves that true power isn't about getting even, it's about making things even for everyone. When you have the ability to create change, the moral imperative isn't to settle scores, but to settle systems, so that future victims never face the same injustices. If you ever witness discrimination, remember Flight 447. Don't be a silent observer hoping someone else will act. Use your phone, use your voice, use whatever influence you have, no matter how small it might seem. And if you're ever in a position of power like Damon Rivers, remember that your response to injustice defines not just your character, but your legacy. True leadership isn't about commanding respect. It's about ensuring everyone receives respect. Change doesn't happen because powerful people decide to be generous. It happens because ordinary people decide to be brave. That's how we transform airlines companies and ultimately society itself. One flight, one moment, one choice at a time.